But before lunch, okay, their gastric processing made them less likely to give somebody parole than after lunch. And I think that's really interesting because it plays to the earlier discussion about the connection between the mind and the body. And certainly there's evidence that, you know, you can warm to somebody if you give them a hot drink, and you can feel cool with somebody if you actually give them a cold drink. So I think that's an interesting piece.
Very interesting. Not to mention that, you know, blood glucose has a lot to do with it too, you know, and how agitated you are as a result. There's a, I can't remember her name, but she's an evolutionary psychologist who's written a book recently. It'll come to me. And she talks about how up to 70% of arguments between couples are actually fueled by low blood sugar. Wow. So going back to, you know, the Eastern or Mediterranean way of thinking, you know, you got problems, eat something. Sometimes you need to have that bite to rebalance your blood sugar, and then think a little bit more consciously, as opposed to being overwhelmed with anger or, you know, I'm hungry, I'm hangry, so to speak.
I think that's really interesting because from the same book, Thinking Fast and Slow, they make the difference between heuristics, which are broad rules of thumb that must be true, and when you actually slow down and think through a problem and go, hang on a minute, that probably isn't true. And I can see, when you touched on the pace of life these days, we use those heuristics, and perhaps if we haven't fed our mind, either in terms of nutrition or in terms of time, we're always going to do those automatic reactions. Oh, he said that. I have a past history of people shouting at me, therefore it must have been angry. I find it very interesting as an example, you know, people saying, you know, that an email might be aggressive, okay? Because actually sometimes words, you know, I can see two sides to this story. One is that the meaning in words is how you receive them, okay? So meaning is what you have read, but I can equally see that the works of Shakespeare isn't just plain text. Shakespeare has written stuff that carries emotion within it. And so I can see both sides to that story that says, well, you know, I didn't mean it that way, but I can equally see that all of Shakespeare's works might be, yes, of course I meant it that way. I'm a gifted author and I managed to put that emotion into words.
Well put. I mean, that's the thing with a lot of digital communication, is that it lacks tonality, which adds meaning and context in the context of that exchange. Reminds me of a time where you know, this was before emojis. You know, when I'm old enough to have used mobiles when we didn't have emojis. You know, back in the Nokia and Ericsson days. And sometimes you send a sentence and the response was, why are you upset? And my response would then be, I'm not upset. I actually mean it this way. Oh, okay then. And I suppose that's what emojis offer today, is that it adds tonality in a way. I did an exercise once with a group where I asked them to create a song of their choosing, or choose a song of their choice, and then change it into an emoji. So the emojis actually sing the song. So if you just look at the expressions, and we have hundreds of emojis, you put them together in a certain way, you end up having meaning. You know, the sun shines, and I got out of bed and I walked the dog, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, and I think that's the beauty of language, you know, and the importance of tonality, because it adds that touch, which you don't get with speed when we communicate. You know,
but then is that not a problem? Because, as you say, if there's a richness in language, if we take our entire language and do it as a single emoji, I'm reminded of a phrase that sort of men think in primary colors, red, blue, green, and women think in terms of tones and
shades,
subtleties and shades and things like that, and so that men perhaps have less words or less vehicles to express how they feel, and women have a rich palette from which to paint a picture or to convey. Now, that's terribly stereotypical, but
but it's possible. I mean, it's interesting because there have been studies, and I can't quote you specifically which ones, where men generally are more interested in things, and women tend to be more interested in people. So that's why statistically you get more men who are engineers
Mm-hmm.
and more women who are nurses or therapists or coaches or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it changes. It doesn't mean there are no female engineers, of course. It just depends.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting. Food for thought.
And so when you're working with clients as a coach, how much attention are you spending on the choice of language and the range of vocabulary? Do you notice any difference, those that have a broad vocabulary or those with a more narrow vocabulary?
Absolutely. Language gives me insight into their thinking, and not just the words they use, but the way they move when they use certain words, the way they emphasize and enunciate certain words, the way they their arms fold at a certain time or they cross their legs. There's so much a client tells you, which unfortunately Zoom limits. And that's why I suppose I miss face-to-face, because there was so much shared that I now have to opt at looking at other things when I'm dealing with a client and look at the screen and try to just study their faces as opposed to have good eye contact. Yeah, I mean, you know, we cannot not communicate. Everything we are, everything we do is saying something, you know, whether it's this ring on my finger or the color of the wall behind me indicates my taste. It's saying something about me. So yeah, you know, there's a lot that goes in that you may not even be aware of it on, you know, it's going in on an unconscious level.